Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dave coming to you from the paddock here in Southern Maryland. Um, I'm enjoying my standard pipe, and a little bit of Kringle Flake today. It's my second or third bowl. I really do enjoy the Kringle Flake. So anyway, it's just nice. I'm sticking to my 5 Christmas blends from now till Christmas. So it's kind of nice. It's a rotation through 5 blends over the course of a month. That's not too concentrated. Hey, today's video is different. I'm either gonna blow your mind or bore the hell out of you. I don't know if it's possible to do both, but you tell me. I want to take you down a discussion of what's called the social contract. I think it's the basis for our American way of life. I think it's been either being or has been broken or violated. I think that's the source of so much of the anger and frustration and yearning for the days of yore that we experience on a lot of our channels and in our families around us and friends around us and in society at large. So, if you're just not interested in a discussion like that, you probably want to go ahead and click off and just go do something else. Because I don't think it's going to be a political conversation. That's certainly not as it am my reading and my research and wrote my notes. It certainly didn't feel political in the sense of, R's versus D's, libs versus conservatives. And that's certainly not the intent as I begin the conversation today. So anyway, it's going to be a very different kind of video. It's going to be pretty serious. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to take you through a series. I try to break it into parts, like what is a social contract? Where did it come from? What does it say? How did it affect the establishment of the United States of America? Then talk a little about its violation and maybe where we are today, and how that affects our generation, the older generation, and my observation of how it affects those coming up generations, those that are 40 and under, 30 and under, 20 years old. Because I think it affects those of us who remember the United States 30, 40, 50 years ago versus those who have no memory except for the last 10 years or so. I think it affects those two types of people very, very differently. And I'd like to take you through my impressions, my thoughts, my beliefs. Certainly not saying any of this needs to be yours. But I think it's a conversation, a subject that needs to happen. I think we're going to start hearing the term social contract or violation of the social contract more and more, particularly as the younger generations grow older. Anyway, we'll see where this goes. So I'm going to read you a little bit. I've got a little bit of research that I pulled up because I don't like talking just off the cuff. You like my dog Spooge, by the way. I don't like going off just my memory or my experiences. I like to get facts on where things came from. So I want to read you a little bit about what is it and how did we get here. So the social contract, in moral and political philosophy, the social contract is an idea, a theory or model that usually, although not always, concerns the legitimacy of the authority of the state over the individual. Social contract arguments typically are that the individuals have consented, either explicitly or tacitly, to surrender some of their freedoms and submit to the authority in exchange for protection of their remaining rights or maintenance of the social order. The relation between natural and legal rights is often a topic of social contract theory. Although antecedents of social contract theory are found in antiquity, in Greek and Stoic philosophy, and Roman and canon law, the heyday of the social contract was the mid-17th century to the mid-19th centuries, when it emerged as the leading doctrine of political legitimacy. The central assertion that social contract theory approaches is that law and political order are not natural, but human creations. The social contract and the political order it creates are simply the means towards an end, the benefit of the individuals involved, and legitimate only to the extent that they fulfill their part of the agreement. Government is not a party to the original contract, and citizens are not obligated to submit to the government when it is too weak to act effectively to suppress factionalism and civil unrest. There's another social contract, a usually implicit agreement among the members of an organized society or between the governed and the government, defining and limiting the rights and duties of each. So a little bit of history on it. The social contract, originally published as On the Social Contract or Principles of Political Right, is a 1762 French book by the Genevan philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The book theorizes about how to establish legitimate authority in a political community that is one compatible with individual freedom in the face of the problems of commercial society. The social contract helped inspire political reforms or revolutions in Europe, especially in France. The social contract argued against the idea that monarchs were divinely empowered to legislate and asserts that only the general will of the people has the right to legislate, for only under the general will can the people be said to obey only themselves and hence be free. Legitimate authority must be compatible with individual freedom. Such authority can only be compatible with individual freedom if it is consented to, and hence there must be a social contract. Since one's right to freedom is inalienable, the people cannot obligate themselves to obey someone other than themselves. Transferring rights to an authority involved renunciation of freedom and transformed the natural equality of men into subjugation. Hence, the only legitimate social contract is one that establishes the people themselves as the rulers. The united will of the people is known as the general will. The general will, to be truly general, must only legislate laws with general form, or laws that apply equally to all. Collective self-rule would increase freedom if the people to whom laws applied were also the ones prescribing them. Philosopher Rousseau, who objected to extreme wealth and inequality, also argued that equality is essential for the attainment of liberty and concluded that legislation ought to preserve equality. When the government exceeds the boundaries set in place by the people, it is the mission of the people to abolish such government and begin anew. In the book, The Social Contract, Rousseau argues that it is the people themselves, not their representatives, who have supreme power, and that everyone taking part in legislation is a check against abuse of power. So I'll move away from the general history and we'll talk about the concept of social contract as we created the United States of America. The term social contract refers to the idea that the state exists only to serve the will of the people, who are the source of all political power enjoyed by the state. The people can choose to give or withhold this power. The idea of the social contract is one of the foundations of the American political system. In early human history, there was no government. Instead, those who were the strongest could take control and use their power over others at any time. The summation of this life in nature before government is that it was nasty, brutish, and short. In the past, the people mutually agreed to create a state, giving it only enough power to provide protection of their well-being. However, once the power was given to the state, the people then relinquished any right to that power. In effect, the loss of rights was the price of the protection they sought. The type of government is less important, whether it be monarchy, aristocracy, or republic, are all acceptable forms as long as the government provides and protects the basic rights of life, liberty, and property to the people. Further argued is that a government no longer protects each individual's right, then revolution is not just a right but an obligation. The U.S. Constitution starts with the three words, "We the people," embodying this idea of popular sovereignty in the very beginning of this key document. Following from this principle, a government established by the free choice of its people is required to serve the people, who in the end have the sovereignty or the supreme power to keep or overthrow that government. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, often political rivals, agreed in principle but disagreed about whether a strong central government or a weak one sufficed best for supporting the social contract. I thought it was interesting how that term came directly into our documents that formed our country. So the next thing comes from an article actually written in the Harvard magazine, if you can believe that. It's actually called The Broken Social Contract. A social contract is a set of rights and mutual responsibilities that we have among ourselves as citizens in a constitutional democracy. A social contract is both what's asked of us and all that is made possible for us by virtue of our participation in that constitutional democracy. What's asked of us and what we receive establish relationships of reciprocity within the citizenry. Our social contract is fundamentally broken. Our society includes people who are being asked to follow the law and to pay taxes, but who are not in return receiving the opportunity and security promised by our arrangement of mutual rights and responsibilities. All right, so that's enough reading. I just wanted to give you a framework for the rest of the conversation, that this thing we call a social contract has been laid upon and agreed to by all of us. Either, like I said, explicitly, like I said, yeah, I'm going to participate, or by just being part of it, you tacitly approve it. Been around since the beginning. I mean, literally from the ancient Greeks, but certainly from the beginning of our country, in most Western countries as well, in my opinion. So it's not something new. It's not something that, we may not know what we called it, but we all know that we participate in society, and we do so relatively willingly or tacitly. But that we all feel a sense of violation at this point. I think it's because of the contract between the social contract between we the people, the citizenry, and the government we've put in place is largely broken at this point. And we're going to talk about why I feel that way. But I watch your videos. Many of you I have text and email relationships. I know a number of you have gone down these roads. But, this contract is broken. And we feel it being broken. But the younger of our society never felt it. They have no idea what a social contract is. None of the benefits that we saw earlier in our lives exist in theirs anymore. And I think so. So in us, it's frustration and anger, and in the younger generations, I think it's despair and lack of hope, lack of drive, lack of caring, lack of participation. They just don't believe any of that shit exists because they've never seen it. We're pissed off, we're frustrated, we're angry because it's being taken from us. We're no longer seeing the benefits of this agreement that we've been living in for 60 years. So I just think it's different. That's why I'm saying that the older generation feels one way about it, and the younger generations feel a completely different way about it, because we were connected to it and believed in it at one time. And I think the younger generations never felt connected to it, never believed it even existed, much less that there'd be a benefit to them for participating. So in a modern world, we say things like, hey, the light's red, I'll stop at a red light. I choose not to steal from people. I choose not to kill or cause harm to other people. I choose to pay my taxes and be a good member of, participate well in society. And I agree to be punished if should I choose to make the decisions otherwise. And I think that's kind of in a kindergarten version of a social contract. That's the one we're in, that, you know, we'll agree to these laws and live by these laws, and in turn we'll be protected and be given opportunity, and our freedoms will be protected. But we're kind of seeing the opposite now, and so I think that there's been so many examples. I know a lot of modern theories say the assassination of JFK is really where the breach, the break in society really began. That's where it became obvious that the social contract was really no longer in place, and that the deep state, dark state, whatever you want to call it, the elites really kind of stepped forward on that day and said, okay, we are now in charge. We're taking control. And there's arguments that they've had it. The Rothschild family goes back 500 years, but in the modern world, in the modern U.S. society, a lot of people say the JFK assassination is where it was sort of announced to the world that things are going to be different from here on. So this concept of a broken or violated contract, I mean, just for me, what I feel, we no longer can trust our elections. We can no longer trust law enforcement. We can no longer trust how the government handles our taxes or spends the tax revenue. Hell, we can't even trust if Social Security is going to exist to help us. Here we're witness to the removal of, rather than the protection of rights, the removal of rights. Gun ownership, freedom of speech to speak out about any subject from any side at any time that we choose to, that we really can do whatever we want as long as it doesn't harm someone else, that we can purchase what we want when we want and purchase from who we want. Our world, pipes, tobacco, cigars is a good example. They want to get rid of it. So they're making it harder and harder and harder to do that. We see the judicial system dispensing pretty much anything but justice anymore. We see the legalization of theft. We see people who commit crime basically either can't get arrested anymore, or they get arrested and get immediately released. And those of us who are trying to defend our lives, our family, our property, we're the ones that get arrested. We're the ones that get thrown in jail. We see healthcare has become completely about profits rather than treatment or cure. Our government has become about monitoring and controlling the people, not executing the will of the people. We see the government, they're moving all the jobs to become government jobs. That's the only way the government can make the economy look strong, is they're adding a lot of jobs to the government, and they want all the pay to come from the government. That universal basic income, or UBI, is something they want to take over all the jobs, all of the economy, and all the money, so they control whether, as you behave or don't behave, they control your pay or not, your ability to use credit cards or debit cards in the future. All want to be controlled by the government. And then government is removing God from every aspect of governing, whether it be, prayer in school, whether it be prayer to open up legislative sessions, the 10 Commandment monuments. They're doing everything they can to remove God from the country that really was based upon it. It's still on our dollar bill. I don't know how much longer that'll be there, but a belief in a higher entity, a belief in God, a belief in God's consecration of the United States. All that's being torn down now. We are standing in witness of all this, and I think these and another 50 bullets, are really the source of frustration we're feeling. We are feeling we are being violated. The contract, the agreement with which we have been operating under for me 60 years is no longer valid. So it changes how we feel, how we talk, changes our commitment to our country, to our government. And I think, we can talk a little bit about the repair of the breach of the contract, but I think that's why there's so much anger and frustration in the world today, particularly from us older guys. So kind of the last subject on the dark side is how I talked to my son, I talked to my daughter, I talked to their friends about this subject a little bit. And their basic premise is there is no social contract. None of that exists. There is no future. There is no hope right now. None of the things that my generation, grew up with exist today. There is no social security. It's hard for them to even find a job. The concept of even buying a townhouse or a condo, much less a house, isn't even in their brains anymore. And I'm talking to 30-year-olds. The people I'm talking to are 21 to 30 years old. They're not even planning to buy a home. In fact, most of them just live for the day. They just spend their paycheck to paycheck, which a lot of we do too at our age too, but that's a whole different problem. The younger generation is doing because there's no reason to save. Buying a new car is almost impossible, and saving for retirement, I mean, they can't even see it. The idea of a career, the idea of working for a company there's a mutual commitment to each other, this just doesn't exist. It's not in their heads. These are fantasies. These are fairy tales to the younger generation. And I'm talking to kids who went to college. My son got a double degree in 3.5 years, got a wonderful job, and is making a hell of a lot of money. He said, Dad, I'm kind of the only one on my crew that's able to pull this together, and it's large because we still help them. But a lot of parents can't help their kids, that's when they move, once they leave. So a lot of these younger generations feel literally hapless, literally hopeless, just sort of existing, living for the experience of life on a day-to-day basis, with absolutely no thought towards a government or a social contract or a support structure or a community. That just does not exist to them anymore. I mean, not even anymore. That's me saying it anymore. They never knew it. And think it's total fallacy to even talk about it. I mean, they look at me like I'm insane for being sad that it doesn't exist anymore. Because in their opinion, it never really did. So I guess we should end this with a little bit about where do we go from here. And the real answer is I don't know. Right now, I'm observing history. I'm observing what the world's doing. I know what I feel. I know what I get from you guys when I watch your videos. I know what I get when I talk to my kids and their friends. The world voted for a sea shift a few weeks ago, a sea change. January 20th, Trump will take office. The Congress will change. The Senate will change. Maybe that does begin a process of righting the ship and starting to rebuild the contract between the government of the United States and the people of the United States. I don't know. I have hope, and I'll do whatever I can to support it. I don't know if I'm confident that we're going to really get the U.S. turning in 2 years. We only have 2 years. We only hold the Congress by 5 seats, and we only hold the Senate by 3. And the chance of us losing a midterm election is pretty, historically, it's going to happen. We'll see. The party in power almost always loses Congress during the midterm elections. So historically, it's going to happen. Hopefully, it doesn't. If we lose either one, either House or Senate, it will put a real damper on what we hope could be done in this country. Maybe it won't. We'll retain it. We'll have 4 years. Maybe someone like a J.D. Vance will win or have more than 4 years. I don't really know. History will tell us right now we have 2 years to get this thing moving. Not sure what else to do. Not sure how else to end this. It's not a pick-me-up. It wasn't meant to be. I just want to have a general conversation about what I see going on out there. And I give all the credit in the world to Justin Bull Moose Piper. It's his video that made me think, God, someone should come out and do a whole video on social contract, because it is the basis upon which society rests. It is the basis upon which free society rests. And that contract is broken. It has been violated. And I think we all feel it. If we can't pull it back together or sew a new one together, we do move into the revolution, overthrow, start over sort of mode. That's becoming that chance becoming more and more supported. So, over these next 2, 4, 8 years, if we can't show the world we're starting to sew the contract back together, I do think other solutions could present themselves. Guys, that's it. I don't know if I bored the hell out of you or shocked you, but I hope you enjoyed the video. And God, that's it. I will talk to you later. Bye, everybody.